Tensions are high in the Middle East as the White House insists all options remain on the table for Iran after the U.S. elected not to strike again last night.
But it comes as reports suggest Iran's new supreme leader is more interested in building a nuclear weapon than his late father.
Chief Foreign Correspondent Trey Yingst is in Tel Aviv with the latest. Trey?
Yeah, hey guys, good morning. The United States has stopped hitting Iran for the moment after 13 straight nights of strikes that ended late last week. Reports do indicate there are diplomatic efforts underway to get the United States and Iran back to an agreement. And we do know this as President Trump indicated on Friday he believes Iran still wants to make a deal.
And every once in a while, they're going to set some things up, but they don't have much left. And by the way, they are talking to us right now. They'd love to make a deal. I don't think they're ready to. I don't think it's time yet, but I'm willing to listen. But they cannot have a nuclear weapon.
While diplomatic efforts unfold with Iran, the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen are once again in direct conflict with Saudi Arabia after attacking 2 Saudi-owned oil tankers last week. The Saudis responded with heavy airstrikes against the Yemen-based proxy group. The Houthis then ramped up attacks on Saudi oil refineries, launching new missiles over the weekend. Days ago, President Trump issued a warning to the Houthis, saying that if attacks on vessels in the Red Sea continue, that both the Houthis and Iran would pay a military price. Despite this, the Houthis are still threatening the Bab al-Mandab Strait, saying that a blockade on Saudi vessels remains in effect. We're also tracking another interesting development involving Ukraine. According to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukrainian forces struck Iranian vessels that were carrying military cargo between Russia and Iran in the Caspian Sea, an expanding front in this war. Countries across the region do remain on alert today, including Israel. The Israelis held a cabinet meeting this morning, and there are questions about what the days ahead will bring. Guys?
Saudi Arabia's defense ministry has said that its air defense forces intercepted and destroyed several drones that were launched from Iraqi territory that were targeting petroleum facilities. In an official statement, the Saudi defense ministry said that the terrorist attempts originated from Iraq and were carried out by Iranian-backed terrorist militias. According to the ministry, the unmanned aerial vehicles were aimed at oil facilities in Saudi Arabia's eastern region. It alleged that the drones were launched by Iran-aligned armed groups operating within Iraq. This, remember, follows the Houthis' threat to block Saudi-linked shipping through the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, accusing Riyadh of enforcing a blockade on Yemen and carrying out recent attacks, including on Sana'a International Airport. The Bab al-Mandeb Strait, remember, is a critical global maritime choke point linking the Red Sea with the Gulf of Aden, through which around 12% of global trade passes. Saudi Arabia demanded that Iraq prevent its territory from being used to launch attacks. There's been no immediate response from Iraq yet to the Saudi statement. Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries had accused pro-Iran militias in Iraq of launching waves of attacks targeting their territory during the earlier phase of the conflict. This incident comes despite a recent halt in direct military exchanges between the United States and Iran. An Iranian military spokesperson said that Tehran had halted its military operations after the United States stopped its attacks against Iran over the previous 2 days. The Houthis have come out with a statement now that they have launched a fresh attack on Saudi Arabia's oil facilities. Earlier, Yemen's Houthis had claimed responsibility for targeting Saudi Aramco oil facilities, describing the attack as the latest escalation between the two sides. The Iran-backed Houthi rebels said they launched missiles and drones at Saudi Arabia in response to Saudi airstrikes on the strategic Red Sea port city of Hodeidah, raising fresh concerns over the security of key regional shipping routes. Earlier, the Houthis targeted 2 Saudi oil tankers in the Red Sea, and in retaliation, the Saudi-led coalition said that it carried out airstrikes on Hodeidah, hitting the port and the state-run telecommunications corporation. Tensions between Washington and Tehran have intensified in recent weeks, with Washington carrying out attacks on Iran and Tehran responding by targeting what it said were U.S. military facilities and equipment in countries across the region.
watching Al Jazeera. We have some breaking news for you. It is Iranian state media saying that a number of missiles have been launched from the center of the country toward Jordan. Jordanian sources say explosions have been seen in the skies over the country. Now, don't forget, on the 17th of July, 3 U.S. military personnel were killed at the Salti Air Base in Jordan. We'll have more on this story, but at the moment we have the U.S. military saying that at 5:45 p.m. Eastern Time, that is, of course, about 45 minutes ago, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps forces launched multiple ballistic missiles from Iran. The IRGC really at the moment for launching these missiles from central Iran, and this is all coming at the moment from the U.S. military, at least. That's what we have so far. U.S. forces remain vigilant and at a high state of readiness as well. They've also said that all these missiles were indeed intercepted. All Iranian missiles were successfully intercepted, according to the U.S. military. All of this, of course, as we do have this hiatus at the moment between the U.S. and Iran in terms of open conflict, at least, but we have several ballistic missiles reportedly being fired at U.S. bases in Jordan, and air defenses were activated, and all missiles, all Iranian missiles, were successfully intercepted, according to the U.S. military, at least. That's what we have at the moment.
Welcome back to CBS News 24/7 Primetime. I'm Juliette Goodrich. Today, Iran launched a barrage of missiles at American forces in the Middle East. This as the U.S. and Saudis strike Tehran-backed militias in Iraq. And then take a look at the aftermath of the airstrikes. Buildings and cars were left destroyed by the U.S. and Saudi strike on Tehran-backed militias in Iraq. At least 20 fighters were killed and 32 others wounded in these overnight strikes. So I want to bring in retired U.S. Navy Vice Admiral Robert Murrett to talk more about this. Robert, thanks for joining us. Was it a risk for Saudi Arabia to join the war?
Yeah, Julia, I would say that it is. They've been largely kept out of things with the focus on the other Gulf states up until this point, and been communicating very regularly with the Iranians, between the Saudi Arabia and the Iranians, to try to stay above the fray to some degree. But that's kind of changed, both in terms of the attacks on the Iranian surrogate forces inside Iraq, but also with their attacks on the Houthis over the past weeks because of concerns that the Saudis have about all their facilities on the Red Sea.
Yeah, so at this point, any signs of diplomacy soon?
Yeah, I think it's a question of degrees, Juliette. There's always diplomacy taking place at some level, whether it's, a really serious diplomacy, such as the ones we've had brokered by the government of Pakistan, and Vice President Vance, for example, participating, or just kind of the day in, day out lower level communications that exist all the time. I would say diplomacy right now is at a fairly low ebb. And one other comment I would make is, you've seen the president in the White House today kind of telegraphed that there might be some more American attacks on Iran tonight, which he does periodically, and his language is pretty strong along those lines just today.
When we talk about diplomacy, is there a hard stop on it when things happen, or does it take a long time?
I think, in answer to your question, Juliette, it's a great point. I think this one's going to take a long time. Two things I would mention. The first is there's going to have to be a diplomatic solution of some type. I mean, the Straits of Hormuz, take that for example. There's really no military solution to securing the Strait of Hormuz and having ships move in and out at scale at the numbers like 130 or so a day that existed before the war started in February. So eventually there's going to have to be some kind of diplomatic solution. My own sense is that's going to take quite a while because of how hard-nosed the Iranian diplomatic negotiators are, and also the fact that the hardliners in Tehran, the IRGC and others, seem to be ruling the roost at this point. So I think they're going to push pretty hard for some tough negotiations, and I don't see those being completed anytime very soon.
Yeah, there's just not an on-off switch. All right, Robert Murrett. Robert, thank you so much.
Go ahead.
Renegade.
Benutzt.
Smoke rising over a U.S.-owned gas storage tanker in Egypt, following what President Trump suggests was an Iranian drone strike. And it comes after Iran's unsuccessful ballistic missile attack against American assets in Jordan.
5 missiles going 8,600 miles an hour, big ones, coming right at us, and all 5 were shot down.
And Saudi Arabia now joining the U.S. in launching precision strikes against Iran-aligned militias in Iraq, with President Trump tonight vowing more retaliatory strikes on Iran.
We got to smack them a little bit.
Is it a hit back when they strike?
Will I always hit back?
Yes.
Pretty much.
The conflict flaring up again in recent weeks after the Iranian regime broke the ceasefire it signed and fired on commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz. Since then, both sides trading attacks. But Americans are souring on the war. 72% of respondents in a new poll disapproving of the president's handling of Iran. A U.S. official and person familiar telling NBC News the president's own frustrations about his military and diplomatic options to end the war erupted during a meeting last week with some of his top national security officials. At one point, the president yelling expletives. But the White House says that description is false and that the president trusts his team.
So we've got some breaking news that's just coming in. NATO has now confirmed that the missile that hit Poland in the early hours of Thursday morning is a Russian missile. So authorities have been investigating a 10-meter wide crater at a site that's around 50 kilometers from the border with Ukraine. Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who traveled to the site, said there was no reason to believe that Poland was the target. He said the military appeared to have responded correctly to the incident, but it would be the subject of a thorough investigation. Now, from NATO, we have heard in response to a Russian missile of currently unknown type that entered Polish airspace and later crashed into Polish territory, one of many missiles fired by Russia at Ukraine overnight. NATO and Poland activated their air and ground defences. NATO is in close contact with the Polish authorities about the violation of Poland's airspace. So DW correspondent Terry Schultz is in Brussels. She can tell us more about all of this. Terry, tell us, what else is NATO saying about this?
That's right, Anya. This statement comes from Colonel Marty O'Donnell, who is the spokesperson for the Supreme Allied Commander and for SHAPE, which is NATO's military headquarters. And it is striking that the first sentence of this statement that he gave me said that it is a Russian missile, because, of course, that's something that we've been looking at all morning since this incident happened. Where did this missile come from? Was it a misguided one from Ukraine, as we've seen in the past, or was it Russian? And this, of course, does raise the stakes even higher. As you noted, there is no indication that Russia targeted Poland. That would not be a smart move by the Russian government, because, of course, then you run the risk that you do, give a cause for Article 5 if a NATO country is attacked purposefully. There is no indication that that is the situation at the moment. But
so just to clarify, Terry, so Article 5, just clarify again for our viewers what Article 5 is and what happens in that case.
Article 5 is NATO's ultimate guarantee that if one country is attacked, all of them will come to its defense. And we really shouldn't be talking about Article 5 in this case. Nobody's been killed, and there's no indication that Poland itself is under attack because of a single missile. But this is something that, of course, Russia would have to keep in mind if it were to target a NATO country. And that's something that always comes up. Now, what we could be looking at, and we don't know yet whether Poland is planning to do this, is Article 4. Those are consultations that a country can call if it feels that its territorial integrity or its sovereignty is threatened. It is a far cry below Article 5, and remains to be seen whether Poland does intend to call its NATO colleagues into one of these special councils at NATO headquarters.
OK, so Poland has not yet requested consultations with NATO because of this, despite knowing that this is a Russian missile.
as far as we know. And again, this is something that it's a sensitive situation because you don't want to call Article 4 consultations about everything. They have generally refrained from doing that when the drones cross into NATO territory, for example, because it becomes meaningless if you're doing this, you know, every day. And let's look at what's been happening in Romania this week. Drones have crossed the border almost every day. So you can't, they use this very sparingly. I'm certain that, you know, Poland is considering it, but they will wait to see whether they feel that they were really targeted and whether a single missile does constitute a threat to its territorial integrity or sovereignty.
Does this incident, however, change NATO's air defense posture along its eastern flank, would you say?
Well, I would say that's already heightened, due in no small part to the fact that Ukraine, right across the border from NATO countries, is constantly under attack by dozens of missiles and drones and, you know, constant air barrage. So NATO has taken measures to strengthen its own air defenses and its missile defenses. When this incident happened last September, when more than 20 drones crossed into Polish airspace, NATO set up what it calls Eastern Sentry, and that is making sure that all of the air defenses and missile defenses that are already stationed along the eastern flank are coordinated. They've stepped up even some of the abilities to share information, to decide under what circumstances they would marshal what resources in the air or on the ground. So I would say that NATO's eastern flank air and missile defense is already on pretty high alert. At the same time, that raises the question of why it didn't catch this missile then.
Right. And I mean, you're talking about a situation of NATO being on high alert. Looking ahead, I mean, how concerned is NATO about, you know, the risk that other missiles are going to cross into alliance territory during, you know, any future large Russian attacks on Ukraine?
They're extremely concerned because it doesn't matter if a missile was purposely sent into territory or not if it kills people on the ground. So, of course, those countries along the eastern flank have constantly called for more NATO air defense because a lot of these countries don't have the capacity to mount this kind of defense themselves. The Baltic states, for example, their air defense is covered by NATO and not by their own air forces. So it's something that is of really constant and heightened concern when you see these kind of things happen. And now that Ukraine is coming under intensified ballistic missile attacks by Russia, it just raises the possibility that one of them will go astray and cross into NATO, as we seem to have seen now overnight in Poland.
Thanks so much for bringing us up to date, Terry. That's DW's Terry Schultz in Brussels.
A wave of relief as rescuers carry a 4-year-old boy to safety from the 5th floor of an apartment building in Lviv in western Ukraine. Rescue workers spent the morning clearing rubble after the latest Russian barrage. The civilian death toll of the war is climbing in Ukraine, and July has been the worst month since the opening weeks of the full-scale invasion. But the attacks reached beyond Ukraine. Across the border in neighboring Poland, air raid sirens also sounded. One missile landed in a field, marking a rare spillover of the war into NATO territory. For people living in the area, it was a mixture of confusion and fear.
I got up, stood on the balcony the whole time because I didn't know what was happening. The sirens were going off one after another.
I only heard the planes. The windows were rattling, that was all. It was around 4 o'clock.
Authorities have now launched an investigation into the circumstances surrounding the strike.
According to military experts, the vast majority of the evidence, including the fragments found, points to a Russian KH-101 missile.
This isn't the first time a missile has landed in Poland since the Ukraine war began. But exactly what happened and how will dictate the response. Kyiv has seized the incident to renew its calls for more air defense systems, saying that they are critical to defending against future attacks like these. Audrey McAlpine, Al Jazeera, Kyiv.
Ukraine is under another massive Russian aerial assault. Missiles and drones are raining down as explosions tear through cities. At least 9 people are dead and more than 50 have been injured. And now President Volodymyr Zelensky is warning
that the Kremlin could be preparing to throw another 5 lakh troops into the war. A fresh wave of strikes, a possible mass mobilization. Is Russia preparing for a decisive new phase of the invasion? Watch our report.
The night sky over Ukraine is lit up by explosions. Missiles strike across the darkness. Drones swarm towards their targets. Air defense systems roar into action as cities brace for another deadly Russian attack. The latest barrage has once again pushed the war into a dangerous new phase. Russia has launched a mass aerial assault using a combination of missiles and drones hitting targets across Ukraine. Kyiv says Russia launched 74 missiles, 284 drones at Ukraine. Capital Kyiv was among the cities targeted. Kyiv residents crowded into an underground metro station to take shelter.
They should withdraw their troops and the war will end. We're defending ourselves. I'm from Zaporizhia and it's very difficult there right now. My parents are still there and we're in touch. They're hiding as well at this very moment.
A Russian strike hit residential buildings in the western Ukrainian city of Lviv. Residents watched as emergency crews searched through rubble and climbed ladders to extinguish fires.
I was terrified watching the rescuers go beneath those concrete slabs. I'm very proud of them. I'm proud that we have rescuers who aren't afraid to go into situations where those slabs could collapse on them. I'm proud that we have such brave men. That's all.
NATO and European leaders openly blamed Russia for firing a missile that blasted a 33-foot crater inside Polish territory during its latest mass attack on Ukraine. Ukraine has been under relentless pressure from the air, but Kyiv is also striking back. Ukrainian forces have stepped up attacks against targets inside Russia, using long-range drones to hit military and strategic infrastructure. The battlefield is becoming increasingly defined by long-range strikes. President Volodymyr Zelensky is warning that something much bigger could be coming. He fears that Russia could mobilize up to 500,000 additional troops. Such a mobilization would dramatically increase Moscow's ability to sustain and expand its offensive operations. A larger force could allow Moscow to rotate exhausted units, reinforce existing fronts, and potentially open new areas of attack. And that is exactly what Ukraine fears. The concern is that Russia could combine manpower with its growing missile and drone campaign. One attack from the air, another from the ground, and potentially hundreds of thousands of additional soldiers behind it. For Ukraine, this is a race against time. Kyiv is trying to strengthen its air defenses, replenish ammunition, and maintain its long-range strike campaign.